Hello everyone and welcome to this video on this course of getting started with Angular. In this part of the video, I'll be going over a very important topic, which is data binding. In the video so far, we have learned a whole bunch of topics such as creating components manually, creating components automatically, the significance of selectors, the significance of the template selected inside of a component.ts. We've also understood how components can be reused inside of other components along with a bunch of other stuff. In this part of the video, I will be going over the topic of data binding. What is data binding? What is its significance? And why I believe it is one of the most important topics when it comes to learning the Angular framework. So before I go on and teach everything using practical examples, I believe a little bit of theory is necessary. So I have this very basic level illustration, and it's just to give you guys an idea of what is data binding without getting too much into the theory. We do have a component.ts. Like every component that we create, we have a TypeScript file, we have a spec file, CSS file, and HTML file. The TypeScript file and the HTML file can communicate between each other, and we did see this in the previous videos when we implemented ng model to actually update text in real time in the DOM when we type something into that input bar. That was an example of two-way binding, but I'll get to that in a second. So basically, when we talk about data binding, we talk about the communication between two components, two files inside of a component, which is the TypeScript file, and the second one is the HTML file. So when we are communicating, basically when we are sending data from the TypeScript file to the HTML file, we use two techniques, which are one of which is string interpolation, which I'll be getting into in a second, and the other is property binding. Whereas if we decide to communicate and send data from an HTML file to a TypeScript file, we use something which is called event binding. So I will obviously be explaining all of these practically, but if I were to give an example of what is property binding, right now in our code so far, we have mostly played around and used static HTML, right? We did in the app.component.ts look at those curly brackets, but to give you guys an example to better explain it, those two curly brackets that we saw in the app.component.ts, okay, I did remove them. Let me bring them back. Yeah, these two brackets over here. This is a very simple example of a string interpolation. So let me first of all remove this code because we don't need it anymore. Now our project is obviously running. Before I decide to explain this, I believe it's better if we give this project a better looking, I guess, appearance. So I will go into my customers.component.html. I have my h1 tag like this. I would create a div with a container class from basic Bootstrap because we installed Bootstrap in the very beginning videos. And I will add my h1 tag to this container. I will add a horizontal line beneath it. And I will also take this app-customer over here and I will add it in. Now, from the previous videos, you guys remember I said that we are using this app-customer as a class. I would like to redo that as well. So I'll just remove this dot and I go back to customer.component.html and I will do something like app-customer. Okay, so something, yeah, I forgot to save my file. I have to save all the files to make sure my changes are working and running. So much better. I have this extra h1 tag. Let me just remove this and I get somewhat of a better looking page. Now, if I go to my customer.component.html, I see this welcome to the component. It's static HTML. It is possible for me to inject elements into this text from my TypeScript file. How I can do this is, instead of having static component text, I add two curly brackets. You guys can give a space, it's up to you, or not. I choose not to actually. And I'll type in something like welcome to the title. Now, if I say that, this will fail, and rightfully so, because now this title is not basic static HTML. It's actually a dynamic placeholder. So for this to work, I have to go into my customer.component.typescript and I have to define a variable. I call it title. I can give it a type of string. It's not necessary, but just good practice. And I can call it, let's say, customer. I click on save, I go back and I can see welcome to the customer. I can make it anything. I can make it customer page and I can see welcome to the customer page. So basically what I'm doing is I'm changing my value inside of the TypeScript file, but those changes are being reflected in the customer.component.html file. This is a very basic level example of string interpolation. It's also possible for me to add strings directly into this file, something like this. Not sure this will work. I think this did. Yeah. So as you can see, now this title has been picked up by Angular as basic level string and not as a placeholder or a variable, but I will remove this. This was a very basic level example of a string interpolation. We use our TypeScript file to dynamically change content of our HTML file. The other way of injecting or you can say making changes inside the HTML file using the TypeScript file is using something called property binding. Now, for those of you who have worked with those who have basic level expertise or basic level knowledge of JavaScript or HTML for that matter, you guys do know that HTML tags do come with something called attributes, hidden attribute, disabled attribute. There are different level attributes, and all of those attributes can be used to change or manipulate HTML tags or HTML in general. To give you guys an example, what I'll do is I'll go to my customers.component.html over here, and I will add a button over here with a class of btn-primary, and this is basic level bootstrap, and I'll say add customer. So I have this button over here which is add customer, right? If I wanted to disable this button, I could just simply add a disabled attribute over here. I go back to my code and I can, as you guys can see, it's been grayed out. This button is disabled. It's not clickable anymore. But we can make these attributes dynamic. We can play around with these attributes using something called property binding. So what I do in my customers.component.html, I will define here a variable which I will call is_disabled. It will be a boolean, and I will say it's true. And what I'll do is let's just make it false. And what I'll do over here is that I have my button over here and I have defined the attribute over here. What I'll do is I will add two square brackets, and enclose my attribute inside of those two square brackets. By doing this, I am telling Angular that I am trying to bind to this particular attribute using a variable that has been defined inside of my TS file. So what am I trying to bind this attribute to? I'm trying to bind it to this is_disabled property. So obviously right now disabled has been set to false. Let me just put exclamation mark, which means the opposite. So as you can see, the button has been disabled. If I remove this exclamation mark, is_disabled is true. I go back and the button has been enabled again. So that was a very basic level introduction to property binding. Now it's also possible to, control this particular is_disabled variable from the TypeScript file. Obviously we have defined it, but there are other ways of manipulating this. So what I'll do is I'll define a constructor, and I will do a set timeout method over here, and I will give it a time frame of 2000, and I will define my ES6 function over here. And what I will do is, let me just put the variable over here for better practice. Just remove all of these extra lines. It's always good to follow coding standards. What I'll do is I'll just say this dot is_disabled is equal to true. So what I'm doing is I'm telling Angular that after this customers component.html file gets loaded in, after 2 seconds, because the constructor is the first thing that is called when it comes to this customer component class. After 2 seconds, you have to set this is underscore disabled variable to true. By default, it will be false, but after 2 seconds, set it to true. Now, if I were to save my changes and my button is disabled, 2 seconds pass, my button has been enabled. Let's see that again. Disabled, 2 seconds pass, enabled. So this was obviously a basic level introduction to, let's play around with hidden as well. Can we do something with hidden? Yeah, so hidden is also an attribute. So if I do something like this, my button is hidden, 2 seconds pass, my button comes back. Let's see that again. My button is hidden, 2 seconds pass, my button comes back. So that is how we bind to attributes. We use something called property binding. If you want to bind to text, we use something called string interpolation. In the next couple of videos, I will be going over what is string interpolation, and obviously I will compare string interpolation with property binding, and I will also be going over something called event binding. And in event binding, basically we change things inside of a component.ts file using the HTML file. So we do something over here, some dynamic actions. Some action takes place in the HTML file, and the result gets applied or influences variables inside of the component.ts file. I hope you guys found this video useful. If you did, feel free to like this video, share it with your friends and family and colleagues, for that helps me out a lot. And until we meet in the next video, this is Mohit Lodhi signing off. Thank you.